Hello, and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, video discussion 21. This is going to be on the film Bridge Over the River Kwai. Now, a couple things to talk about to give perspective. First of all, this movie is more fiction than it is fact. There is that river, and there were some bridges built over it, and there were some British prisoners. Other than that, it's mostly fiction. I went and did some research to make sure, because when I saw this when I was much younger, I thought it was fact. I thought it was real. And what's interesting about it, I think that the performances and the script and the story was so authentic, so solid, that it leads you to believe it's real because the wisdom is correct. In other words, there's lots of things in this movie that could possibly have happened or have happened in real life. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, unfortunately, I can't show clips. All of the software that I use to try to make clips out of stuff just blanks out the screen. And so, as always, we're going to be doing little pictures and things to do the story. And then the second thing is, the lessons, again, are going to be about the character in the movie. So just make sure that you understand that. We're not trying to go back and do some sort of historical thing because, like I said, they don't really match. And that's about that. So if you haven't watched the movie, it's 60-something years old. So spoiler alert, right? Go watch the movie. But this is something that I've probably watched it, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. And I kept thinking, what is it about this movie? What's interesting about it? And finally, after going through all this stuff with leadership, it's, aha, this will be an interesting thing to talk about. So, as always, I'm not going to go through it in super detail this time. This is the archetypal leadership model. So we've got the personality traits that I suspect most leaders have. And then we've got the talent. And then we have the character, which modifies the talent and the personality. And then we've got the archetypes that were listed in 4 different sources: the Tao Te Ching, Army Field Manual from 1987, Field Marshal von Moltke from the 1800s in Germany, and then what I believe is the archetypal model. So the gray stuff is mine. So just like I've said before, none of this is original to me except for the gray stuff. All right, let's get right to the movie. So, movie starts off, Japanese prisoner of war camp, and they were fighting in an area. This is the movie again. They were fighting in an area, and this entire battalion was ordered to surrender. So the Col Nicholson character surrendered the whole battalion. They come marching into the camp. First thing that happens is the commandant of the camp, a guy named Col Saito, comes out and says, hey, here's what's going to happen. And officers are going to work just as hard as the enlisted soldiers are. And Col Nicholson says, nope, just so you know, here's the Geneva Convention. Here's the rules. It says officers are only going to be used in administrative capacity. And the colonel says, nope, they're going to work. So this starts the standoff. So over the next few days, when they report to go out for work detail, the colonel says, no, we're not going to work. So there's one day where they're told to stand there all day in the sun. One of the officers falls out, and then all the soldiers go off to work. They come back. They do this for several days, and then the commandant of the camp, a guy named Col Saito, gets really mad and puts him in solitary confinement, Col Nicholson, and puts the other officers in another separate area. And then it's, this whole battle of wills and trying to get it to sweat you out and all this sort of stuff. So at one point after another, again, after a few days, none of the work is getting done that they want. They're trying to build a bridge across the River Kwai. None of the work is getting done, so the commandant gets frustrated, pulls the colonel in the middle of the night, tries to give him food and booze and all this sort of stuff to make him change his mind. And he says, how about just field officers and above don't have to work? The colonel says, nope, this is pointless. I'm not doing this with you. The officers aren't going to work. So then we fast forward to, this is that scene. I'm sorry. So he's in there. You see, he's all worn out. Got some Johnny Walker Red, trying to get him to change his mind. But then he calls him in, and that's what this scene is. I'm sorry. He calls him in and says, "Hey, this is the anniversary of a Japanese victory in the early 1900s. So we're going to do a general amnesty, and officers don't have to work." So the colonel wins. Now, the lesson about this we're going to talk about later, but this is so it ends up working out that way. So then the colonel goes out to inspect the work that's being done. The soldiers are all over the place. Stuff's falling apart. People are acting like a bunch of hooligans. Everybody's just thrashing around being crazy. Nothing's getting done. And so he hatches this idea that he wants the soldiers to have discipline. He wants them to behave like an army. He wants them to represent the British Army well. So then he comes up with the idea, well, why don't we actually really build the bridge the best that we can? Because World War II, little British history, so these guys had been in India and other things in the South, other different British colonies, and so they had people that had had experience building these bridges. So his officers are kind of, well, sure, I guess, but isn't that considered helping? He said, not. The goal is we want our soldiers to be treated well. We want this to happen, on and on and on. So then they proceed to do that. Now, the interesting thing is this guy here is the doctor, and I forget the doctor's name. Guess I should have written that down. The doctor comes walking along with him and says, "Hey, are we sure that we're doing the right thing?" Again, Col Nicholson says, "Look, morale is improved. Everybody's got work to do. We're getting fed. We're not being abused anymore because we're getting done what needs to get done through this, by building this bridge." And the doctor says, "Well, wouldn't this be considered treason? Because we're building the bridge." So it's an interesting question, right? You're a prisoner of war. Are you supposed to do the best that you can when you're a prisoner? Or are you supposed to do something else? Who knows, right? So then let's talk about some of the lessons learned from the movie. Okay, so the first lesson is principles matter. Okay, so Colonel, now, like I said, if this had been a prisoner of war camp and the way that prisoner of war camps were run in different places during World War II, I'm not sure that I would have tried to stand up to the guy because they just sort of killed people. In real life, in the real story about this area and what happened, so over 100,000 people died when they were building this railway and this bridge. So, one British officer is not going to make a difference. Anyway, principles matter. So this is something that's true at the macro level and at the smallest level possible. If you have a standard in your organization and you accept beneath that standard, that's the new standard. Because if you let people get away with something less than you want, they're going to do less than you want again. So he was standing firm on the principle that officers aren't going to work, because then you only have to win that victory once. So then the next time he says, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, he said, I'm going to comply with the Geneva Convention. And so if the Japanese officer had said, okay, well, let's get out the convention and we're going to set down the rules and we're going to abide by the convention because you've agreed to do that, completely different story. But because of that, he held firm and went on from there. All right, so after he got released, actually not true, this was before he got put into the solitary confinement. It showed him walking around, checking on the living quarters for everybody. So he's walking through some place, found a spot where there was too much standing water underneath, and just looked at one of his officers and he said, I'll take care of that. And they came to a next place and there was a hole in the roof. Didn't say anything, just looked. So clearly everybody knew that he had standards for the way the soldiers were supposed to live. So that's great, right? Once you've established standards and you hold firm to them, everybody knows what you expect. Consistency is key. Okay. So that was really neat to see because, like I said, they're in this nasty prison in the middle of nowhere. So then he came up with the goal, and the goal was to take care of his soldiers and reduce their suffering and get them taken care of as best as possible, despite the terrible conditions and the fact that they're POWs. And so there's the goal, right? I mean, his vision wasn't we're going to do a mutiny and try to escape. His goal was I want discipline. I want people to be fed. I want people to get sleep. I don't want abuse. And so in the movie that happened. Now, would this have been considered, this is just a question, I don't know, would this have been considered treason? I'm not up on my war law, but I do know that in the real story, right, there were some British and Australian and several different military prisoners of war that built this bridge and this railroad, and nothing happened to them, right? The officers and all of the people that were involved in all the suffering and murder and whatever else, they got punished. But would it be considered treason to build the bridge as good as possible? You know, could his sub goal have been, we'll build it and then we'll put some little fatal flaw in it so that the first time a train goes across it crashes? I don't know. But then let's go to the next thing. What would a real leader have done or do if they got back and they said, hey, you helped build this bridge, and you know they got supplies across it and it helped these people get defeated, so we're putting you on trial? Well, what do you think that he would have done? So for a long time, I thought that he would fold, but I really think that his character would actually say, nope, I convinced him to do it. I made him do it. It's all on me. Don't punish them. Because here's my goals. Here's what I was trying to achieve. We achieved all that. Yeah, we built the bridge, but don't hold them accountable because I made them do it. That's different, I think, than the My Lai massacre thing where they said, oh, I was just following orders. Because if somebody at the top in My Lai had said, punish me, take it all out on me, don't punish my soldiers, it would have changed everything. But that didn't happen. Go watch the My Lai video. And then here's the bonus question. So there's this kid, again, I couldn't find a better picture. So there's this kid right here. His name is Joyce. He's in the movie. He's a Canadian. And they were at this special warfare school doing some training. And Joyce, the exercise was to ambush people. And Joyce wouldn't kill anybody, or he, simulated kill somebody with a knife. And so they have this meeting before the mission happens. Oh, I don't want to do spoiler alert for the end of the movie, but they basically get this special operations team to go in and try to blow the bridge up. So the commander of the unit is sitting there. Colonel Shears, this is American officer, is sitting there. This guy who's the commander of the mission, and they say, well, what about Joyce? And the colonel, the big boss, says, I don't think he's got it. The British officer says, well, they call him in and ask him some questions and say, hey, will you be able to kill somebody in cold blood? He goes, well, I'd like to think I could. And so the British officer says, well, at least he was honest about it. And the colonel, or the American officer, Colonel Shears, says, well, hey, he wants to go so bad, I'm good with it. But nobody answered the question about whether or not they thought he could actually do what was needed. So you have to watch, but basically he doesn't do what he's supposed to do a couple of times and then finally does, but he puts the whole mission in jeopardy. And so it's another one of those cases where, you got to really make sure you're taking the right people along. Part of it too was when I first saw this, I was a teenager and I was going to join the military, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that sort of stuff. Would I actually be able to do something like that? So I sort of saw myself in the kid Joyce. That's why I said it's a bonus. Anyway, so just thought it would be a fun experiment to go through that movie and see, what sort of lessons we could get out of it, because it was really well written. And it's worth watching if you haven't seen it. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so this is the last bit. So let's take Colonel Nicholson and then compare him to the archetypal leadership model. So personality-wise, what could we observe in the movie? So he had positive emotion, high intellect. He was assertive. Did he have the talent? Yes, because they show him picking the right people to solve the problems and to go through the issues and to achieve the goal. Now, when we come to the characteristics, did he have humility? None that I really saw. But the interesting thing about the humility angle in the movie is it was a lot of him against Colonel Saito. It wasn't that he wanted to be worshipped by his people. So the humility wasn't displayed as far as I could tell. Integrity, yes, because he was achieving the standards and he was keeping his word. Empathy, yes. Empathy different than sympathy, because remember how we said he's going to be empathetic by seeing what's going to happen to his soldiers if they don't have a mission. He didn't want them to be treated badly. He didn't want any of these things to happen. So he was empathetic, not sympathetic. And then vigilance. Yes, the vigilance is obvious. Half of the movie is him going around checking on stuff, which is great. Now, the nice thing about it, too, is you don't see him personally going over and telling a soldier to do something. He gets the officers or he gets his subordinates to go get his people, their people to do it. So then let's evaluate against the 4 over here. So was he a leader or a person in charge? Well, this one's difficult because they show him being respected and trusted by his people. So we could maybe say loved and praised and tolerated. I mean, I'm thinking he was more of a person in charge from what we saw, because he wasn't feared. I don't know. It's an interesting question, right? Because he wasn't barely known, because he was omnipresent. He was everywhere all the time. And so I'm wondering, he had the talent, maybe just had some character flaws, so he was a leader, which is fine, right? You can be a leader, you can have the talent, and you can have the personality, and be a little flimsy on some characteristics. So it's an interesting thing, because he definitely wasn't just a person in charge. He was definitely trying to get things done. Anyway, like I said, it's a great thought experiment. It's fun. It's fun to look at. Okay, so Bridge Over the River Kwai came out in 1957. Crazy, isn't it? Obviously not a sponsored discussion. And that's all that I had. As always, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.